JP Smith, good morning to you. Before we talk about whether or not you are wanted by the movement, the Gatvol Capetonians, speak to us about why it is that evictions are ongoing in Cape Town despite the very clear rules around the disaster management which are now in force.
So I think when we talk evictions, there certainly is a problem with shack farmers and people who are from their informal structures evicting people notwithstanding the lockdown regulations. It's something we have raised with SAPS, and we don't understand how people are telling us that they are being expelled from the informal structure they're living in during this lockdown period when evictions are halted by the regulations. So that is indeed a problem. The city, on the other hand, is faced with a situation where we have to do counter-spoliation, where people are invading land, and whereas the state president, Minister Cele, Minister Sisulu, and many others have said, we simply cannot tolerate the unauthorized invasion or occupation of land. And so those on a daily basis we are required, in terms of the PI Act, to prevent, and we are doing our best to do that.
So who is doing the evictions? Who is carrying out these evictions?
So, I mean, the people who we're finding in fields who are telling us that they're being evicted, and in some cases those stories aren't entirely plausible because the people making the arguments do not themselves live in informal structures. We know where they live on the other side of town in formal housing. But the people, some of the people we're finding on the fields have been evicted from informal structures by shack farmers or by people, landlords in informal settlements who are evicting them. And those persons are breaking the law by putting somebody out of a shack when they can't pay, or out of any structure when they are a long-standing tenant. That is not permitted. And so in those cases, those people finding themselves deprived of accommodation where they have lived for some period of time have legal recourse. And we believe that SAPS should be pressing charges against these landlords who are evicting people. It's hard to understand that it could be happening at the scale that is being suggested. But that said, there certainly is legal recourse for people whose landlords, under those circumstances, are attempting to put them out of their homes.
JP Smith, can I flip that question around and ask, why is it that the city's anti-land invasion unit, not the one that is helping the citizens who are being evicted, that they take those cases to court as opposed to waiting on SAPS, who perhaps have their hands full at the moment? Why isn't the city getting its hands dirty in order to try and preserve the dignity of these citizens?
I would suggest to you that it is SAPS's function. The city can't absorb every function of SAPS and pretend it's the city's work. So that's very much the key role of function. The enforcement of the Disaster Management Act is their core responsibility. Ours remains traffic and bylaw enforcement primarily. So absolutely we're helping. But at the moment, the burden of dealing with the unauthorized occupation of land is squarely falling to the city. So when you say people have their hands full, I promise you there's no hands more full than that of the city. So we're happy to help. We have, in fact, I have offered some of the leadership figures who have been in touch with me that our investigations unit will assist with taking statements and making those statements, laying charges where people are willing to come forward. The first ones who do, we're very happy to go and assist them to lay charges.
Yeah. JP Smith, there is an accusation that is being made against you and the city, and this is part of the reason why the movement, Gatvol Capetonian, say they do not want you anymore to be the MMC for safety and security. But their main accusation is as follows, and I want to quote directly from Mr. Adams, who just spoke to us this morning. He says, when white people need land, ecological issues do not matter. Is that how the city of Cape Town does its work?
Absolutely not. As per usual, Mr. Adams is profoundly ill-informed. So let's start at the beginning. Mr. Adams is part of a political party. His party is called the Cape Coloured Congress, and yes, he may occasionally masquerade under another name, but he registered that political party, and he is standing for local government elections. So the shutdown this morning, which has largely failed to muster any meaningful numbers of people, and the actions by this person over the past period of time is that of somebody wishing to garner support and interest in the run-up to the local government elections. With regards to planning approval, I can tell you that architects and our housing developers in Cape Town will tell you that the laws around biodiversity land and ecological considerations are very much part of the issue. They're very much part of what those developers face, and some developers will tell you that the city is very stringent with upholding those rules, to the point that they have substantial arguments with us and engagements with us, and I've been part of some of those meetings in the past. But I can tell you that the land being invaded is not by and large biodiversity and flay land. Yes, it is that too, but very problematically, because you can never effectively render services there. What is being invaded at the moment is housing sites. Sites approved for housing, 1.3 billion rands worth of housing development sites that are being targeted, because the leadership, the agitators targeting these sites, understand that if people are able to settle there, in order for us to proceed this year with funding that's approved for this financial year and building plans approved for this year, that if they are able to occupy those sites, then we will need to accommodate the persons before we can get an eviction order. And that accommodation into alternative accommodation short circuits the housing waiting list, which is one of the things that this same self-contradictory Mr. Adams complains about very bitterly, because he's a racial nationalist, when he says that certain race groups in this city are not favored against black persons who he believes have arrived more recently. It's a narrative he likes to punt. And the housing waiting list is the fair and reasonable process for people to access waiting opportunities, housing opportunities, which is why in many communities we are being flooded with complaints. I personally think I probably dealt with about 300 to 400 complaints yesterday of people angry that land is being invaded near them. And in some cases, communities stood up to land invaders themselves, which gave rise to further conflict.
All right, JP Smith, thank you very much for your time. Speaks for the City of Cape Town.